Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to talk about financial stress and well-being and why we are studying this topic. Financial well-being is a really important factor in the overall subjective well-being, and there's an increasing interest in this topic, for example, in the field of economics. From the previous literature, we know that financial difficulties have many negative effects. They affect negatively, for example, on health. They can create difficulties also in other areas of life, such as in social relationships and personal resources. And also financial difficulties increases stress, and higher stress level weakens the cognitive ability and weakens, for example, the ability to make long-term decisions. And I think the Basic Income Experiment provides a really interesting setup to study this kind of questions, since the basic income was paid every month regularly and unconditionally. And as Minna told, we made a survey last autumn, and we asked about their subjective evaluation about their income and their stress level, and we had questions about financial stress. And so in this presentation I will show some descriptive results on these topics. So about income, stress level and financial stress. So first, the respondents were asked how they feel about their current income. And the treatment group feels their income slightly better. So for example, 13% of the control group feel that they have very much difficulties, and 13% of the treatment group feel that they have difficulties, and 17% of the control group experience difficulties. And then we asked about their stress level, and the picture is quite similar than the previous picture. So the treatment group feels less stress. Around 1/4 of the control group feels quite or very stressful, and around 15% of the treatment group feels quite or very stressful. And when these two questions are combined, we can see that there is a statistical relationship between the subjective income and the subjective evaluation of the stress level. So those who have more difficulties, they feel their income situation more difficult, they have more stress. And when we look the same picture separately for the basic income recipients and the control group, these income categories are the same categories as in the previous picture. So number 1 is living comfortably, number 2 is coping, number 3 is finding it difficult, and number 4 is finding very difficult. And in all these categories, the basic income recipient seem to experience less stress. There are some not that straightforward results. For example, in group number 2, the no stress group is bigger in the control group, but the overall picture seems quite nice. And then we asked some statements about the financial stress. So my financial situation is under control and I can pay my bills on time. I have financial worries. I have an emergency fund and I can make reasonable financial decisions. And in general, the respondents seem to be coping. So majority of the respondents have a possibility to pay their bills on time, but the majority doesn't have any emergency fund. So they are surviving. And when we look these statements separately for the treatment group and the control group, the treatment group is again feeling less financial difficulties. So they have more often possibility to make reasonable decisions. They have more often emergency fund, less financial worries, and more often they can pay their bills on time. And then conclusions. So these results are very preliminary and further analysis is needed. And for example, as Minna told, the response rate was quite low, and for me the number of observations seems also quite small. And although the treatment and control group in the survey are quite similar, there is some over-representation of higher income groups in the treatment group. So we need to analyze this further and combine the survey data with the register data so we know the actual income of the treatment and control group. But these, I think the results are really interesting in this preliminary stage also. So the preliminary results show that the stress level and the indicators of financial stress seem to be a bit lower in the treatment group. And there can be several mechanisms that drive these differences. And the first one is that the basic income recipients might think that they are in a better position than other unemployed individuals since they are participants in this experiment. They know that the aim of basic income is to make more simple and more sort of regular social security benefit, and if they compare to themselves to other unemployed individuals, they might think that they are in a better position, and that's why they feel less stress and evaluate their income better. But another mechanism is this regular and secure income might decrease the stress level and might improve their well-being. But at this point, I think these results are really interesting and worth of further analysis. Thank you.
Thank you a lot, Signe. So, who will now go first? So we'll start from here and then we continue to that side.
Thank you. I would like to ask about this, because this so-called activation model was introduced in the beginning of 2018, during the basic income experiment. And so this is related to both this and the previous presentation. So how much of this could be the effect of, like the negative effect of the activation model to the control group, and to what extent it could be the positive effect of basic income to the test group?
That's a very good question and comment, but that's true that the unemployed people have had some extra worries because of the activation model, but we don't know. We don't know what's the role of the activation model in these results, but that's really good question.
So my question is, so basically with the last slide here, you're kind of being giving a little bit of a reservation in terms of the interpretation of the results. So am I understanding correctly that you're saying that part of the effect could be just, okay, we might have a selection issue, but outside of that, part of the effect could be just kind of this positional thing, kind of relative. Okay, the other guy doesn't get it, I get it, and so I feel better about it. So kind of that's a little bit of a reservation that you put in there, right?
Right, that's right. I worked with Marit Lassander, and she has provided previous evidence, and one of the mechanisms can be the comparison to other unemployed people and the effect of participating in the experiment.
We have time for some other questions before coffee break. So who would like to go next?
Not a question for Signe, but just a short comment to the activation model. There may be an effect, that's true, the negative effect on those who were targeted by activation model and they were not in the basic income group. I would assume after studying quite a long time the unemployed people that it has negative effect, kind of increases stress, the idea that you have 65 days time to show that you have been active enough. And in the beginning of 2018 it probably had an effect. Whether it has had an effect in the end of 2018 is another question, of course. But there is research coming from activation model, for example, from Signe. And after that, we perhaps know more about how the activation model affects unemployed people.
May I continue just with a brief clarification question, because I don't know too much about this Finnish activation model that was introduced during the experiment. But in Otto's presentation, we saw that people did not opt out of activation policies that much. So was the treatment group not maybe also targeted by that activation policy? Just to know about that.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. But remember, so the data I showed is from 2017, and what we call the activation model came into force in 2018. So actually, it'll be very interesting to look at the 2018 data and see if people actually decide to opt out. And that's actually my pre-expectation, but we'll get to see, because it became a lot more kind of nasty.
Okay, let's go for the last question before our coffee break.
You say there that higher income groups were overrepresented in the treatment group. How did this happen? I mean, I thought that you have this random selection and you also take into account societal sort of fiscal parameters.
This applies to the respondents of the survey. So we had a random sample, and then the sample was interviewed, but not everybody responded. Some of them didn't answer, some didn't want to answer the questions, and that's why the final sample of the survey respondent is not random.
Thank you for the audience for the lively discussion so far. Let's hope that we can continue the lively discussion during the coffee break. We also have some time for concluding discussion at the end of the seminar, but let's continue the seminar at 10:35. Enjoy the coffee.